Absolutely. So you launched us straight into when I said there are two practices that I'd like us to use as the approach road, as the infrastructure setting, as the scaffolding that we build for those two overarching themes from Kyriaki and Avshalom. The first practice is what you're launching us into, Peter. It's what I call permanent line inquiry. Okay, what's a permanent line inquiry? Permanent line inquiry is when you develop a question like the one you just framed. What is the purpose of human life? What are we doing here on earth? And you can ask this in a variety of different ways. So it's when you develop an inquiry like this, and it becomes for you something that carries a potent desire, and you are developing an insistent passion about the inquiry, such that it drives you, and it's something that you're working on in the hope to unlock a mystery, in the case of your question, or solve a problem, perhaps in some of the other questions we already surfaced. And those inquiries, they become permanent line inquiry when they are lodged beyond a surface level interest, beyond a surface level curiosity. When it becomes something that's lodged in your mind and in your semi-conscious mind and your unconscious mind, such that it is working in you and for you, even when you do the dishes, or when you watch a movie, or even when you're asleep, such that you will wake up in the middle of the night and sometime in the morning and you'll have a new thought and you may want to capture it. That is an example of a permanent line inquiry. And I will propose that most of the great achievements we appreciate, whether it's a great achievement in art, whether it's a great achievement in science, whether it's a great achievement of a leader, of an important figure in history, they were all propelled by some kind of permanent line inquiry. We mentioned already Gandhi. Gandhi was somebody who was inspired by a core permanent line inquiry, which was to do with it changing the nature of man, and ultimately the permanent line inquiry of the future of India and the independence of India. Mandela, who was influenced by Gandhi, had his permanent line inquiry about the future of South Africa. Marie Curie had her permanent line inquiry. We already mentioned our friend Albert Einstein. He obviously had his permanent line inquiry, more than one. And so on. You can go to reflect on, for example, great inventors. Benjamin Franklin, extraordinary statesman and inventor and influencing figure for the founding fathers of America. He is an example of somebody who, even at the age of 16, 17, formed a permanent line inquiry about the character of men, which is why he shaped those 13 virtues that he determined will go with him for the rest of his life. Then when you look at somebody like Thomas Edison, or you look at the Wright brothers, who, just to name a few examples, couple of examples, who pioneered and expanded the range of invention and innovation in a variety of fields, they were inspired by their permanent line inquiries. And I sense that you have already, the three of you, shared some of the area inside of which you have a permanent line inquiry. So I'm proposing to offer a simple step-by-step process, 3 or 4 step process, to formulate a practical journey how you can develop your permanent line inquiry. But before I do, anything, Kyriaki, you'd want to offer on anything that we've covered so far, please.
It's very inspiring to hear you, Aviv, and Shalom and Peter. And in relation to the methodology of how to approach an inquiry, I would just like to add from my part, the Socratic code of one thing I know is that I know nothing. And this allows a fresh approach and a question, just like Peter said, and maybe humility also that Ashelon mentioned when we gathered today. And also what I advise my daughters is that if any dogma is trying to hike you, just run away from dogmas, because they lock you, they lock your mind. And I think one part to approach things is, if we really want to be finding pioneering and innovative approaches and ways of thinking, is that we must challenge dogmas, and we must actually turn upside down even the very stones that we are sitting on. Otherwise, we are going backwards instead of forwards. And I think this is an approach. But also in relation to what you just introduced about how deep runs your inquiry, or how it is propelled by your intuition, by sentiments, by vision. I think that this is something very important that now science is starting to realize, how these propellants can actually make a big change. And not just science, also the business world, and also education, entertainment, medicine. It seems that we've been running a lot on a more academic approach of things, neglecting the feeling life and the driving forces of that. So I find great validity in reapproaching how these two can actually work together hand in hand.
Yes. And right there, you seeded something that we will come back to when we talk about the 12 challenges. You just framed one of the 12s, but still in the context of what you're offering about inquiry, and I think your invitation is, let's be daring in the sense of being prepared to challenge almost any assumption we use, anything we take for granted, such that we are prepared to ask the questions that are fashioned by the very questions that we ask. Because often when we frame inquiries, we already have some working assumptions, and we need to ask about each of the inquiries we will frame, what are the assumptions that shape that inquiry? And that's a legitimate and important provocation and challenge. So here is what I'm proposing as a simple practice, because what we want to do here is approach the territory of inquiring into humanity's future, whilst we also offer practical briefs and practical tools and practices that people can pick up and use. And we already offered some, and what you just offered the Kyriaki about, well, first begin with a Socratic awareness that the one thing we know is that we either know very little or we know almost nothing. And that requires us to challenge the very ground we stand on. So here are the simple steps. Suppose somebody just joined this journey with us now, and they say, I don't know, it's the first time I'm hearing about permanent line inquiries. How can I do this? What can I do with it? Well, step one is try to frame the broad territory or space of your inquiry. So, for example, in the sense of both your inquiries, you could say that humanity's future is the broad territory. And how to approach, how to think about humanity's future in a constructive and a productive way perhaps brings it a little bit more into focus. And perhaps the question from you, Kyriaki, is if I was to bring into it just a little more higher resolution, it would be what is a regenerative and an inclusive way for humanity to care for its future? And specifically, perhaps if we were to bring just a little more resolution with what you offered, what's a way to transcend conflicts, to transcend wars and subjugation, to find a redeeming, collaborative, co-creative way for people to bring forward the best of each party, such that we are building a unified or a unity-based operating system that is working on a premise different than a zero-sum imperative, one that's based on winners and losers. So that's a kind of trying to keep still a broad space, but bring some definition to the territory. That's step one. And so you have both done step one. And certainly Peter done step one in saying what's the purpose of human life? Why are we here on Earth? I propose that step two, and this builds on what Kyriaki just offered, which is engage with it not just from your brain, but from the many inner lives and your intuitions and feelings and such. That what you do in step two is you write on the top of the document, whether you use your keyboard or whether you do it on the old-fashioned pen. And what you do is you try to write under that question. Formulate several questions, or in fact, as many questions as you can form. Maybe 20, maybe 30, maybe 40, maybe 50. Different aspects of the inquiry space. And the purpose of this step is to expand, to use up the thought patterns that you typically travel to get to a point where you begin to use different angles, where you begin to push your mental patterns beyond the habitual fashioning that you often use to create space, to enlarge the space for new inquiries. And as you do this, you pay attention and you look at the very questions you frame, and you begin to develop questions on the questions. Like, for example, one of the first questions you asked, Kyriaki, was about the freedom to be inspired and to inspire, the freedom to encourage and to be encouraged. So, well, there is a question about that question, which is, what is that freedom? What prevents it? Could we say, could it be that it's very natural for us to be inspired by each other and to inspire each other? And could it be that if that's not our natural response, that something is holding us back from that natural response? What is it? And how might we be able to help facilitate the unleashing of that kind of way of being with each other and interaction? So I used to, at various stages in my life, have a notebook that I would fill with questions and inquiries. And sometimes hundreds of inquiries. And it led me to step three. Step three is very simply, so you look at the 40 or 50 or 60 questions and you do one of two things. You either grade them, each one of them, say on the 1 to 5 energy scale. 1 is, this is low in energy. 5 is, yeah, I'm really interested. This question really resonates. and you then see which of the questions bubble to surface to be the top most compelling inquiries. And then perhaps you look to find within those the top 3 or the top 5 or the top 7 most compelling inquiries, and then you work into them together and you see whether you are able to synthesize a certain unifying inquiry. Well, that becomes your permanent line inquiry. And now you come to the real test. Now the real test is, can you find that this inquiry has the naturally arising place in your process when you're not in front of your keyboard, when you're not in front of your pad? In other words, can you come back to it? Is it naturally arising for you in your various meditative, contemplative practices? And there are ways to cultivate it, such as you'd say, okay, this is my permanent line inquiry. I'm going to work on this permanent line inquiry for the next 7 mornings. For 20 minutes, I'm going to write. Without thinking very much, I'm just going to write the question on the top of the page and write for 20 minutes whatever comes to me about this inquiry, or for 10 days, or for 40 days. I've often done that. There was one year I even decided I would do it for 365 days, many years ago. I was young and a little more crazy than I am today. And I applied that practice. And so I discovered the power of permanent line inquiry. And that's ultimately how you want to use that practice. It is something that you come back to. And if you found the right permanent line inquiry, and I will say this sentence in a different way, if the right permanent line inquiry found you, you are using the inquiry is using you, you're using the inquiry to propel you to horizons of consideration you wouldn't without it, and it uses you as a vessel, as a tool, as a conduit to access through you the intelligence streams that it potentially needs. Premise being, there are intelligence streams that are seeking to be accessed and to be unleashed. And why this is so important is because what you already said, the 3 of you each presented an inquiry, and the implicit inquiry with the inquiry was, well, we don't seem to be able to access the intelligence to bring humans together around that kind of inquiry. Why? Why is that so? And what might be necessary to enable that? And I'm proposing that one of the ways to work with that is to use the technology of permanent line inquiry to bring to bear, to invite, to engage intelligence streams that will offer us even more of what we might be able to reach for together. So that's the permanent line practice. And I just wanted to put those 3 or 4 steps together in case somebody wants to just take that template and apply to anything. Apply to personal development issues, global issues, business issues, health issues, relationship issues. You can simply use the same 3, 4 steps to codify your approach. So number 1, identify the broad territory. Number 2, download and formulate as many questions as can be under it. Number 3, evaluate and synthesize the high energy, high resonance questions and synthesize from it the lead, the spear of your inquiry, that permanent line inquiry. And number 4, now begin to work with it in such a way where you let more than your brain, more than your mind, you ultimately let your intuition, your feelings, the care intelligence in you, the love intelligence in you, the relational intelligence in you, the fascination intelligence in you, all those different intelligences that can access human process to work through you to enrich and empower you in the pursuit. And there is a point where you begin to feel that what's coming through you is wiser and smarter than you as a person. That tells you you're now beginning to swim in the vein of an intelligence stream that is interested in your inquiry. You are no longer flying solo, you are flying with something that is interested in your inquiry, which perhaps is a hint in relation to Peter's question about what's the purpose of human life and what are we here for? Could it be that we're here to, between other things, not to fly solo, but to swim with potent, interesting, elevating intelligence streams to create that kind of reciprocity with those potentiating more than human causing realms that enable people to unlock the greater range of possibility that can be available for them, which we always feel and sense with anything that's truly inspirational in the fields of arts, certainly music, philosophy, and even on the global stage in terms of world leaders that inspire us. There is something about what they become a vessel for that compels us, and I'm proposing to think into it today in the context of intelligence stream that can join our process. So I said a lot there. Let me pause here and make some space for anybody to come on this.